Welcome back to the Real Estate Standard Podcast. This is episode 29, where commercial real estate and Bitcoin collide. I'm your host, Tim Kotzman. Today is July 20th. I'm joined by Kenny Alves and Chris Drizga. Each episode, we break down how serious operators, investors, and developers stay competitive and profitable in the 21st century by examining commercial real estate through the lens of Bitcoin. On today's episode, we're joined by Tyler Stevens with Exergy. And first, I'll hand it over to Kenny to give us an update on Westmain Storage stacking.
Thanks, Tim. As of today, July 20th, we hold 15.72 Bitcoin. So far this quarter, we've stacked 32 million satoshis. Quarter to date, we have a Bitcoin yield of about 2%. Bitcoin per square foot, 22,653 satoshis. What is that? That's if you take all the square footage of commercial real estate in the US, approximately 97 billion square feet, and you divide it by all the Bitcoin that will be 21 million, you would get a number 21,649 satoshis per square foot. That's what we consider our Bitcoin parity per square foot number, and we were able to break over that about a month ago, and we're currently over that by 1,000 sats per square foot. So we have officially reached Bitcoin square foot parity, and we are over to our real estate coverings. Our Bitcoin holdings cover about 3 years and 8 months of mortgage payments. Our digital credit covers about 3 years and 3 months of mortgage payment, and together it's about little under 7 years, 6 years and 11 months of payments, mortgage payments there. We've talked about it for the past few weeks here that we've accumulated a digital credit position of about $1 million of stretch issued by Strategy. That right now has increased our net operational income by about 15%, $120,000 a year in tax deferred cash flow. It comes in as return of capital, one of the best tax treatments for income. And that's the equivalent of about 36 climate controlled 10 by 10 storage units. So we've created an ancillary form of revenue, which we consider digital rents. And yeah, that's kind of where we are. What do you think, Chris?
The bear market is for building. I've heard people say in the past, and I think that's exactly what's going on here. I mean, to hit some of the numbers and even exceed some of the projections that we had for ourselves at the beginning of the year, in the market environment we find ourselves, I think just kind of underscores that not only the strategies we're employing are so powerful, but they're working. And I keep hitting on it the last few weeks here, but we're finally at a point where we're seeing all these different strategies or these maneuvers, if you will, start to come full circle and work together in a very complementary fashion, right? Whether it's the DCAing of Bitcoin, the digital rent component with STRC. We had the tax loss harvest transaction a few weeks ago that not only had a tax component, but ultimately ended up being a net accretive transaction in terms of satoshis. We haven't really gotten to, which I think we're going to touch on today, some of the energy strategies and how that creates some operational efficiencies and potentially even another income stream. That'll be a nice addition to this ongoing discussion. And we have a refinance on the horizon as well. That is going to be part of this, this broader portfolio, essentially. So it's really nice to see everything coming together, and the flywheel it's been spinning and it's just picking up speed. So it'll be really exciting to see where these metrics sit when we, break out of this 60K rut we've been in. It feels like forever. and get back into the 80s, 90s, and beyond, the financial performance is going to be, it's going to be staggering at the end of the day. So, yeah, those are my thoughts for today.
Yeah, one thing before we get into it with our guest today, Chris, one thing I wanted to bring up was, we've been thinking about how we have these different sources of revenue and these different buckets in which we can allocate capital to, and also we can rotate that capital. And we're seeing Bitcoin at 65,000. It looks like the bottom's in. Nothing can ever be certain. It looks like, we're on the mend here. And one thing that we've been floating, around offline was the idea of dollar cost averaging out of our digital credit position and into Bitcoin, where we could really pour some gasoline on the fire, where we're buying on average $10,000 of Bitcoin every week. If we were to sell $10,000 of stretch every week, we could be buying 20,000, and we could increase our DCA on the Bitcoin. And since we purchased, we did a larger capital raise, our largest capital raise this year in May, where we raised $1.6 million, and we took the proceeds and we put half into stretch and we put half into Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is down roughly 20-25% from that purchase, while the digital credit we purchased is down about half. It's down like 12.5, 10%. And there's an opportunity here where we could sell the digital credit, and much like we had that tax loss on the Bitcoin that we captured, we could capture a tax loss there and allocate the proceeds to Bitcoin, and actually dollar cost average with our Bitcoin and get a lower cost basis for our Bitcoin, and end up with more satoshis per square foot, which is our true North Star metric. Like everything we do, the quick takeaway is looking at your sats per square foot. And we want to get it into a position where we can use that Bitcoin that we have, that's like a dual collateral, where we can borrow against that Bitcoin to acquire more real estate. At the end of the day, we're a real estate operating company using Bitcoin to grow and to advance ourselves.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say on the topic is that what you're describing is the active balance sheet management that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. It's ultimately the fifth return driver for commercial real estate, and that is another new concept. Seems to be a reoccurring theme here, new concepts, but it's going to help real estate operators navigate various market cycles, various market conditions in a more effective manner. It gives them more optionality when they are able to use a non-correlated asset, and what's the word I'm looking for? Use a non-correlated asset to create different optionality and different opportunities. In this case, we are using Bitcoin and digital credit. So, with the refi coming up and what that'll do to the NOI, there's some consideration there. What is the right sizing for for that digital rent position, and how much coverage do you actually need? So I'm sure we'll get into that in much greater detail here in the coming weeks and months, but I think you're exactly right. Okay, I want to turn over to our esteemed guest, Mr. Tyler Stevens. How are you, buddy?
Hey, gentlemen. I'm doing very well. How about you?
Not too bad. We appreciate you making time
Likewise.
to join us here.
Yeah, this is going to be fun because I appreciate, you walking through all the different financial tools you're using to increase that North Star metric, which is awesome, sats per square foot. And I'm here to dive into how Exergy might be able to help improve that metric. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, we have touched on the energy topic once or twice over the time of the pod here. Kenny has a lot more experience in the energy space, solar and mining, than I do, but I think it's an incredibly exciting area, and it's really part of the third pillar of how we look at the future of real estate operations and investing, right? So we're kind of, our big umbrella is, you're going to have 4 pillars. You're going to have your treasury strategy. You're going to have your capital strategy. You're going to have your operational strategy, which is where the Bitcoin mining comes in. How do I integrate it into existing mechanical systems to either subsidize and offset some of the expense, or in some scenarios, create a new revenue stream? That's a big topic. That's what I want to get into with you today. And then the 4th category is your AI and technology. How are you using those tools to make better informed decisions in real time? And we've got into that 4th category a little as well. But let's bring it back to today's chat. Like, what is Exergy? What are you guys doing, and what problems are you trying to solve in the marketplace here?
Sure. Yeah, just a little summary on what we do and why I think it aligns so perfectly with what you gentlemen are highlighting. Exergy is an energy company that integrates hash rate, Bitcoin mining hash rate, into building systems. It started under the framework that could be using the heat that comes off of a Bitcoin miner. The principle there is all the electricity that flows through these power-dense computers, these data center-style machines, ultimately gets converted into heat. A traditional data center would have to exhaust that outside, get rid of it. And we came in and we were like, wait a second, the largest buyer, like one of the largest line items on operating a building is like heat, specifically in colder climates. But 60-70% of building energy consumption comes from heat. Half of the world's energy consumption is towards space and water heating, comfort heat, what we call, not melting things, not industrial processes, but just keeping spaces warm. And I make that distinction because computers can get warm enough to keep you pretty warm if you've ever sat with a powerful desktop in your office or something like that. And then we recently realized that this same energy framework of monetizing heat also applies to excess solar. If you think about a building, it's going to use heat either for space or water heating. It also is going to have the sun shining on it, and you can't stop that, right? And so there will be instances where you have excess solar generation, maybe not for all buildings, maybe not in all locations, but there will be those many businesses, many buildings that do have that opportunity to monetize excess generation. That's already done. I think for the example case you guys highlighted, it's being done through exporting excess generation back to the grid, and there are different structures, and they'll pay you for that. And we came in and thought, well, what if you could get a better deal than what the grid or the utility may be providing you? It's different based on jurisdiction and which utility provider you have, or if you're off grid. But there are instances where Bitcoin mining can pay you more for that excess energy. And then the third piece is, what about the brief moments where we have the bull market rip and you're building all of a sudden, maybe it's time of use-based pricing, cheap electricity during the evening, whatever it may be. There are these moments in time where it's actually a profitable revenue generating operation to just mine Bitcoin, whether you need the heat or not, whether it's sunny or not. There may be instances where that building can monetize and make profit on that energy flowing through it. So it's kind of this 3-pillared approach, whether you're heating, you're monetizing excess generation, or you have these times of profitability where if you were to have a Bitcoin mining tool, infrastructure, that mechanical device in the building, you can really use it to its fullest. And so we at Exergy, we believe Bitcoin miners, a large portion of where they will end up in the future is in building integrated systems as an energy tool akin to solar panels or heating appliances, or even like building batteries, things of that nature. So it's technology, it's energy technology. It has this beautiful feature where it's decentralized and automatic, meaning you don't have to rely on third-party services or providers. You literally plug these things in, they connect to a network, they do some operations, and you get paid for doing that. It values it. And what does it do all the while? It makes heat. So it's like, we found this way to flow energy through this device, makes heat and money. And I think buildings want heat and money.
We got to clip that. Buildings want heat and money. I love it.
Yeah.
No, that's an excellent overview. I appreciate it. And there was, you and your team had recently put out a playbook for people that are interested in this topic. Whether it was residential real estate or applications or even commercial. And I think you framed it exceptionally well, and it kind of helped me properly think through how to think about this. And now I think I'm going to butcher the phrase exactly, but it was basically along the lines of, outside of running a data center or a Bitcoin mining operation, those operations, their sole purpose is to generate a profit, right? Everyone else, that's not how you should think about it, right? You should be thinking about it from the standpoint that I have this office building, I have this warehouse, this retail center, it's already consuming energy, right? How can I optimize that existing energy consumption, right, to my benefit? Is that a good way to put it, or did I just totally
No, most
butcher it?
certainly. Yes, that's very well way to put it. The framing is this useful miner principle. So if you're a listener to this podcast, you're not very familiar about Bitcoin mining, Chris hit the nail on the head. These guys, these operations, everything from small, family, small to family office to publicly traded large operations, they're looking for cheap power, on grid or off grid or whatever it may be. Plug in Bitcoin miners. You have some operating expense, you have technicians, et cetera. You have CapEx, you have hardware, but you exceed the cost to run that operation with the Bitcoin mining profit. And they'll sell that Bitcoin to pay off their expenses, maybe stack some to the side. That's a typical Bitcoin mining operation. It's become increasingly out of reach. If you're down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, you understand that mining is hyper competitive, has this apex predator approach. It's always looking for cheaper power. The difficulty increases as more miners come online. That makes it difficult for you. And what we're describing here is that you don't have to seek profitability if the miner is a useful energy system. If it's subsidizing that heating cost, you were going to buy the heat anyways. It's a sunk cost, right? And so if that net electric expense for the electric heat and the Bitcoin rebate, we call it, comes back cheaper than what you would have paid for your gas bill, your propane bill, et cetera, then that's a useful framework there. If the Bitcoin miners are paying you more to monetize that excess solar generation than the grid would give you in credits, then that's useful. And then there's that third pillar, which is there are brief times where it actually just might be regular old profitable. That is kind of that, hey, when we can run the building like a traditional Bitcoin mining operation, we could also do that. And so then you have these three targets, really, to say, when can this miner run to be useful to me, to make money, to help me save money? And that's how we think about Bitcoin miners. And that turns out to be a much lower bar that I think millions of buildings can clear, rather than this hyper competitive, we got to go find 50 megawatts in West Texas. We got to get all the infrastructure. We got to get the operators. We got to get good deals on the miners. Run this while we can. We're coming in and saying, you're already paying for this energy. You're just not stacking any sats. So let's get that in there as well.
Yeah, I'm interested in where you assist building owners the most. Like, which part of the country do you see this? Like, where Westmain Storage is located in Rhode Island, we have an expensive energy market, and it becomes very challenging for it to pencil out, especially when we look at our energy footprint for heat. We're about like $6,000 a year. It's like the building is super efficient. It's a multi-level, three floors, and it's super tight. So, older self-storage facilities that have the drive-up units and they have partial climate controlled, and normally those are like facilities that don't operate as efficiently, and they lose heat with the doors opening and closing. Sure. and things of that nature. So for us, like Chris mentioned, we tried mining back in 2016, and I'm sure that you guys, well, I'm not sure. I guess I should ask you, but I'll tell you, we were using just the regular S9s back then. That was like top of the line equipment, and they were very loud. We had 10 of them, and they were making some noise. So we did our best to try to mitigate the noise, but ultimately it wasn't going to work out there for us. And I'm sure that you guys do now that they have like the mineral oil where you submerge these ASICs, they can be a lot quieter, and you heat up the mineral oil and then, but I'm not sure that's what you guys are doing. Are you guys doing air cooled machines, or I guess I could start there, but I got a ton of questions for you guys.
Let's do it. These are great questions. And what you're describing right off the bat is the technical problems that I like to call them. Bitcoin miners today are not designed for what I just described. This is a bit of an idealistic end goal. We at Exergy view them as energy systems, right? They should be controllable, like energy systems, responsive to solar, responsive to thermostatic heat calls, etc. Right now, they're intended for that data center application. They're loud. They're not meant to be in a building. They're not meant to have to be quiet, right? It's almost akin to me saying, hey, we just invented the steam locomotive. What if we put wheels on this thing and it didn't have to ride on tracks, right? But like car hadn't been invented yet. So that's kind of where we're at. There are workaround solutions, and I would say we are in the phase of retrofitting and making it work. One of those things that has to be solved for is noise, most certainly. Another one that you pointed out was this immersion cooling. That's kind of, think of it like a bathtub of oil that doesn't short circuit your electrical devices. You can put any device in there. You can put a toaster in that, and it won't short circuit, it won't break, and then the oil gets hot. And once you have hot oil, that's hot liquid, you could turn that into hot water just with a heat exchanger without getting too into the weeds, but you can move the heat around. These are all things that are being solved. They're stepping us towards this idealistic view that Bitcoin miners could be used as energy infrastructure, but it's very much the retrofitter hacker space right now. There are not miners that come off the shelves ready to plug in and replace a heating element in a hot water heater. There are not plug and play boiler replacements or air handling units that you'd see on top of a commercial building. I think we'll get to that point. There's a lot of technical problems that need to be solved along the way, which we are involved with. What we're doing at Exergy right now is, through a lot of trial and error, we figured out which machines are best for what we can get away with today. And we're focused on two things. The control is the big one. For any commercial building, there's building management systems, either on BACnet or Modbus or other alternatives. They've got a maintenance guy, they've got operation manuals, etc. We need to get the Bitcoin miners to tie into whatever they have and be responsive to the rest of that building management system. So that's software. We're working on software. In the playbook that Chris alluded to, we've done a lot of that in the residential space. We started there just because there was a lot of easy open source smart home software that we could plug into to start. And then the other one we're solving for right now, we kind of do our smart selection of which miners we know are not already allowed to begin with, things like that. The other thing we're focused on is sizing. And that's something we outlined in the playbook as well. I think it's actually the most important piece of the playbook, which is, if you bought those S9s, Kenny, when they were the cream of the crop, they were quite expensive, I'm sure, as well. Miners have this commoditized price. The ASIC chips are very expensive to develop, $100 million to get in line at Samsung to make them, etc. If you think about it, it's a very complex, expensive way to turn electricity into heat. Traditionally, you just run it through a resistive wire, right? And it'd get hot, like a glowing hot wire. That's how electric heat would normally work. But we're flowing electricity through this like super complex, 2 nanometer chip process. The point being is that when you're sizing for a building's heat demand or a solar array, every additional amount that you want to add to the building for heat or for solar monetization, it costs exponentially more, right? If you think about it, if you were just going to sell that excess solar to the grid, the infrastructure's already there. You don't have to buy any miners. If you were just going to heat with natural gas and it's really cold in the winter, you just burn more gas. You just open the valve. And so every additional amount that you want to increase the size of a Bitcoin building integrated system costs more. So our sizing framework is not intended to work how the traditional building space works. I think with commercial, it's called manual N. We're getting into some semantics here for mechanical guys, MEP teams, but they size for that coldest day. It's a liability thing, right? You want to make sure your systems all work when it's -20 at night and nothing's going to break. No one's going to get a call. You can't size like that, or you'll end up buying 10x the amount of miners you need. 90% of them won't run except for that one coldest day. The deal didn't work out. It was bad idea. So that's where we've kind of mapped out this, what I call like a hybrid building approach. I'm not suggesting that a commercial building should only have Bitcoin heat, should only have a Bitcoin miner to monetize the solar and not a grid connect, right? I'm describing almost like a hybrid car. You have all the systems at play, and that software, that building management software, it knows the hash price, it knows the network difficulty, it knows what your thermostats are calling for, it knows how expensive your other heating fuel is, it knows what the grid would pay you, and in real time, it's deciding where should we flow this energy to make heat, to monetize excess energy. And it does that with the Bitcoin miners being substantially lower size, smaller sized than the traditional. You would have your cheaper natural gas furnace that could serve the whole building, no problem. And then you'd have a Bitcoin heating system that's probably 5 to 10 times smaller in heat output, but it could probably deliver 90% of the heat load throughout the year. And those few days when it's really cold, the gas kicks in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's like a supplement, right, to the heating system, and you kind of duct tape it on, so to speak,
Yeah.
Probably a lot more professional than that, like, mount it with the proper struts and all that stuff. But you're pairing it with something that can handle the extreme cold temperatures, but to your point, like most of the time it's going to be enough to cover the day-to-day stuff when it makes sense.
Yeah, the miners call this, in the mining industry that we outlined earlier, an uptime. They call it uptime. You want to get like near 90%, 90+% uptime. The AI guys,
99.999.
yeah, the AI guys need 99.999. That's how much of the time are you making your Bitcoin, right? Well, you don't want heat 99.9% of the time, and the sun's not sun's not fluxing on your panels 99.9% of the time, and it's not profitable 99.9% of the time. But if we kind of overlap these different time frames, you want to get the maximum amount of time that your Bitcoin miners are working for you and paying themselves off and adding profit and reducing the net operating or increasing the net operating income. And so that's how we frame our sizing to maximize that for each building, and it's unique to each building.
So I got a hardball kind of question for you.
Okay.
So I actually been getting calls from colleagues that are working in AI and data infrastructure space, and one of them had an idea kind of similar to what Exergy is doing here, but not in the sense of heating up your building, but in the sense of like another way to monetize building and your energy from the building, and that's with like these AI edge data center scenarios. And Chris, we actually talked to a self-storage guy that's looking at this at his 10,000 to 15,000 square foot, to add it as a part of his self-storage facilities, as like an additional revenue source. So when I think of Bitcoin, like I think of it, like you mentioned earlier on the call, like it's always looking for the cheapest source of energy. It's like and like AI is like the polar opposite, right? We've even seen publicly traded Bitcoin miners turn off their mining operations to go, sell their power purchase agreements to these AI hyperscalers. Essentially, they're getting outbid. So like where the Bitcoin network might yield you, say 10, 11, maybe even 20 cents a kilowatt hour if it's a bull run, you're monetizing those kilowatt hours that you're feeding the machine. These hyperscalers are like going gangbusters. They're going insane. They're like, we'll pay you 60 cents a kilowatt hour.
Correct.
And at that point, you're like, well, I'll just sell them the power at 60 cents a kilowatt hour and buy the Bitcoin. And that's essentially what we have 2 solar arrays on our facility. One is designed to cover our energy footprint, and we eliminate that energy cost, which adds tremendous value to us when you look at it from a cap rate perspective, which we've discussed. But when we sell back to the grid, that's actually, we had to sign like a 20-year power purchase agreement to sell them all the power that system produces at a fixed rate. And when we looked at should we mine Bitcoin with that energy, or should we sell it to the grid and then just buy Bitcoin on the open market, that's what we ended up deciding, because we had these tax credits that we were generating. And so I understand like that there's certain areas in which this like, it's a clear win to put towards hash power. But I'm very curious, like how you, like, I'm sure I'm not the first person to bring this up, and how you kind of resonate with that, and how you look at that.
It's something I've been thinking a lot more about lately, and those numbers sound exactly like what I heard at the Texas Energy and Mining Summit. They were these were bigwigs, so they were talking in megawatt hours instead of kilowatt hours, but they said AI compute will pay $60 a megawatt hour, whereas Bitcoin mining is closer to the $10 per megawatt hour. So multiples less. I think, and maybe it works for some larger buildings and for a certain time period. I think in the long run, Bitcoin mining is unique to HPC compute in building integrated systems for a couple of reasons. One of which is just the orchestration. So we mentioned uptime, 99.9% uptime, low latency, right? If you think about it, what we're effectively describing is two ways to monetize electricity. You could flow electricity through the Bitcoin network and get money. You could flow electricity through GPUs and get money from an AI company. The AI company inherently has to orchestrate that, right? It's like the man in the middle. And I'm not saying that that won't work or won't be solved. I think it's a harder problem to solve. And for certain buildings, it might be easier to just say, I don't have to have a deal with OpenAI. I don't have to have a product that talks upstream to some data or cloud system. I'm just going to connect this and we're done. The other reason is there's this, on all electronics, there's this downward pressure to get more efficient, right? My iPhone in front of me is more powerful than the Saturn V rocket. Your laptops get more powerful, they get more efficient, they use less power. That's because the goal is compute. The goal is inference, intelligence, right? And so you're not always pushed up to the barrier of using as much power as possible. Using as much power as possible is not the goal. Getting the inference is the goal, right? With Bitcoin mining, your economic reward is directly proportional to the amount of electricity you put in, right? It's not directly proportional for GPUs. If you're doing the math, if it's efficient, it uses less power, then that might solve your problem. But I don't think this downward pressure applies to Bitcoin mining. If your building has 5,000 watts of excess solar at all times, why would you put in a Bitcoin miner that's less than 5? You're always going to want the most. Does that make sense? And that solves the heating problem. Because if the GPUs are getting more efficient and less power hungry to do the same job, to get paid, then they're going to use less power, which means they're not going to be effective heaters because more power means more heat. And so I think that same principle applies to the solar monetization realm as well. I'm curious to see how it plays out. I'm not claiming to have all the answers. That's my thesis, though, of how this is going to work far into the future is GPUs, like all other electronics, will have this downward pressure to get more efficient as well as pay you more, whereas Bitcoin miners don't have that. Literally, what a Bitcoin miner is they're all constrained, these shoeboxes, by how much power you can flow through them. They would put more chips in them if they could. They'd melt, right? So that's how they're kind of like accidentally became heaters in my mind.
So am I wrong in like thinking like the reason they spit out heat is because they're inefficient, right? No. So almost 100% of that electricity has to turn into something. This is just a thermodynamic law. Like, for example, your car engine is only 30-40% efficient at turning the fuel energy, like the chemical energy, into motion. 70% of the energy in that gasoline gets turned into heat. And so a Bitcoin miner is just the extreme of that. Around 90+% of that electricity gets turned into heat. A very small amount spins the fans, drives the pumps, has the little LED flicker light on the front to tell you it's connected to Ethernet. But effectively, it's the same principle as an electric heater that you would see in baseboards or electric boilers, electric hot water heaters. So they're like, no matter how efficient these engines or even ASICs get, like they're always going to have the byproduct of heat, is what you're saying. So
correct. Yep.
Do you see that the newer ASICs have that give off less heat than compared to like an S9? Is S9 still the best for generating heat?
No, they all turn all of the electricity they consume into heat. What I'd say that the new ones do better is the industry is trending towards hydro cooling. So that's no longer air cooled with fans. It's no longer dunking them in that immersion oil to capture the heat in liquid. They're straight up out of the box, cooled by water. You plug them into a rack, and then there's these little hoses that connect in and out. And cold water goes in and hot water comes out. You know what else has cold water go in and hot water come out is a boiler. or a hot water heater. And so they're designed out of the get-go in this way. And so that's a huge benefit. I see that they're already coming with that cooling solution. They call it a cooling solution. I call it a heating solution, right? They're silent.
Yeah,
I was
because
just going to ask.
Good, Chris, sorry.
No, I thought that was a great, not even a segue, but when you're thinking about, Kenny's comment earlier about the noise, right? For someone that's interested in, exploring this, I mean, what does, one of these solutions look like, after it's been installed on the building, right? What is the noise issue? Is there a housing of some sort that holds these machines? What can they expect?
Yeah, I don't even install air-cooled systems with loud fans for air-based heating systems. And I think that's an important thing to point out. So we have a customer that was outlined in the playbook in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, and he's got a traditional furnace. 70% of homes and buildings in the US are heated with forced air, not radiant loops or radiators, old boilers in the Northeast, etc. We have one of those water-cooled miners. It's silent. Cold water goes in, hot water comes out. This is a closed loop. We're not like adding tap water to it, right? So like the coolant in your radiator of your car is closed loop. You don't add water to your car. It just circulates, right?
Mm-hmm.
So hot water comes out. We then turn that into a big radiator, like that is on the front of your car, and a fan blows over that hot water and turns the hot water into hot air. In the commercial space, this is actually quite common when you have to send heat over large distances. Air loses its energy quite easily. It diffuses, right? And so if you have a long distance, a long warehouse, you might have what's called a fan coil unit. That means like you have hot water being generated. You pipe the hot water. The piped hot water holds its heat much better than air. And then where you want to deliver it, you just put it basically through a car radiator and it turns into hot air and it blows out. So that commercial project we have in Boulder County, that's their intended design. The boiler in the mechanical room is a regular boiler. It sends this hot water to fan coil units and blows hot air where it needs to go. All we're doing there is adding this water-cooled Bitcoin miner that already makes hot water right next to that boiler. We're buddying it up in what we call a buddy system, and all the rest of the infrastructure doesn't have to change. So in terms of integration, it's one water-cooled miner, a rack to hold that, power, Ethernet, and then a heat exchanger. You're just like connecting two plumbing, like a plumber can do it in an hour.
Yeah, I remember I was going to comment on the water-cooled ASICs. I thought that was going to be a short-lived gimmick, but I guess I was wrong there. I remember, all the MacGyvers kind of dunking their setups. They were taking the fans off. They were putting their boards under the mineral oil. I actually had a friend buy like a fish tank, and he never got around to doing it, but like he was going to give it a go.
This is a great thing you brought up, because I also wondered that when I started paying attention to this industry or emerging industry. And now I'm convinced that immersion is the one that was short-lived. It won't live much longer. It's already dying out. And hydro is the future, the name of the game, the status quo, for a handful of reasons. Well, for what we're talking about here, having a dielectric oil, having computers and electric outlets submerged in a mechanical room, and having a plumber or an electrician come over is like a non-starter, right? The oil is also very messy. It's prone to leaks. The molecules are actually smaller than water, so it's a pain in the ass. It leaks everywhere. And then also these dielectric fluids, they are actually non-compatible with many traditional fittings in the plumbing industry. So now you're talking about having to do a completely custom rest of the infrastructure that I just mentioned so that the building can accept this form of heat. Whereas in a water-cooled system, you don't have to change anything or cause headaches for the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing team that's designing the building. You just say, no. We just have to cut in here, 2 lines, done.
I can just imagine a property manager trying to fiddle around with this dielectric fluid and all the headache that comes with it. The poor property managers are already overworked and underpaid as it is.
Yeah. One other thing that's been interesting to watch, to tie a bow on this water-cooled miner maturation, is that all of the water-cooled miners, except for one, are 3-phase power, which pretty much out of the box with what's available on the market today means commercial. in North America, we do not have three-phase 480 volt power in residential homes. So we are locked into that one single phase 240 volt dryer outlet compatible Bitcoin miner for the residential space. And this answers better a question that Chris asked earlier, like what does it look like? For the commercial space, you have a lot of room in the mechanical room, you have three-phase power. The technical problems are actually not as complicated. A traditional miner that is intended for that data center in West Texas, it looks like a regular server rack that you'd see GPUs in. The miners are actually converging to that same form factor as GPUs, which makes sense if you think about all these mining companies going to AI HPC compute, right? They don't want to have to redo all their rack space in their whole warehouse. You just slot in a new computer. This one does GPU stuff, this one does Bitcoin stuff. That's it. And that makes it easier for the commercial building integrated mining applications as well, which is you just get a rack. A traditional server rack doesn't have to come from a special mining supplier. Like you could get a regular server rack, the same suppliers that Anthropic or OpenAI have. And then we do that sizing to get the right number of machines. So you get the best bang for your buck. They slot in. And then rather than dumping that heat through a big dry cooler outside, which is exhausting it into the air, we plumb that into the building heating system or a dry cooler to exhaust the heat outside when you want to monetize solar and you don't need the heat. That's pretty much it. And so it's not much extra infrastructure in that sense for the commercial space.
And I think that's critical to further adoption, right? The less barriers to entry, the less hurdles that these operators, these property managers have to deal with, the better, right?
Exactly.
I mean, which just makes perfect sense. I'm thinking about just all the different applications, right? Like you think of some of these apartment operators, right? If a couple hundred unit facility, every single one of them needs hot water. They probably have a pool or a jacuzzi,
Yep.
right? Same thing with a hotel. They have all the rooms, they have the spas. I mean, the need for warm air and hot water is essentially endless at those facilities. And then you start to think about the tax advantages that come with real estate, right? You start to acquire some of this equipment and can depreciate it, basically year one. We haven't modeled anything like that out just yet. We probably should, but that is, there's some significant benefit, right? Especially that's before you start to factor in the Satoshi output and what the appreciation potential is on that, that newfound income stream.
You're highlighting a really important point for the commercial space as well, which is that the uptime of these miners, the amount of time that they're running might not be exclusively related to the weather, right? For a heat load, or the solar flux for a solar load, or the time of use-based power deal you have for the profitability. Rather, low-grade, comfortable heating temperature ranges, warm air, warm water, might be part of the actual business operation. So I have a friend, Jason, in New York, who has a company, Bathhouse New York City, and he's heating tens of thousands of gallons of water for his business model, a bathhouse, a member-based community spot where you can go in sauna and go in the hot tubs, etc. And that was all already running with electric resistive heaters. So he could buy a bunch of Bitcoin miners, the right amount, sized properly, integrate it with his plumbers, perhaps depreciate all those assets from the tax benefits of Bitcoin miners themselves. His bill didn't change at all, and now he's stacking sats, right? And I think there are a lot of those businesses out there. I have another friend, Cade, up in Idaho, who's doing a truck wash where you just want hot water to get all the salt and grime off of tractor trailers, right? That's one of those instances where that 3,000 gallon tank of water always wants hot water, right? And there's a lot of those out there.
You're absolutely right. You start to think through all the different applications and use cases in the commercial world, and it's the TAM is hard to really get your arms around. I mean, I'm in Southern California, and there are some massive warehouses, distribution centers. They're servicing the Long Beach port, the LA port. It's one of the most critical logistics markets in the entire country, if not, the entire, North America, in some cases. And, when I'm doing my day-to-day work and, working through some of these maps and aerials, I just see all, 200,000 foot facility, 500,000 foot facility. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, put some solar panels on it.
That's a lot of square footage on the roof.
Size up the miners properly, right?
Yep.
I think that's another really key way that you framed it or kind of repositioned this entire thing is sizing of the miner, right? You don't need the top of the line state of the art machine.
That's right.
Right. I mean, so that's incredibly important takeaway too. But utilize that roof space. We have, what is it, Kenny? 90% sunny days here in Southern California, if not more. So, activate that. Real estate operators are one of the big things the last handful of years is activating common areas, right? And people not inside the space are like, what the heck does that mean? Right. Well, activating the area means to utilize it in a, not necessarily a net revenue generating way, but almost as an amenity space, right? How do I bring tenants and consumers into a particular area that would otherwise be dead space or common areas and in some ways I can potentially market that as an amenity and charge premium pricing because I have that feature and my neighbor doesn't. So I don't know where I was going with that. I lost train of thought, but
well, I view this as really just you exemplifying the utility of putting miners in buildings. And back to Kenny's point earlier, this is not like a one size fits all solution. I think you briefly asked, when is this a good fit? The building might be in Maryland. If you think about it, I'm describing electric heat offsetting your other heat source. We're talking about solar. So there's a few things already pointed out here. Sunny, right? 90% of the days in Southern California are sunny. Okay, so if you don't have solar, maybe it can still work out if you have expensive heat, right? Because we're trying to have an alternative here. Well, that implies that you would have expensive gas and cheap electricity. Now, how common is that? It's actually not that common. So if you don't have solar and you're not on expensive heating fuel and your electricity is not cheap, then it's not a good fit, right? But where does this make sense? Long winter seasons, sunny. Colorado is actually great. It's quite sunny, high desert, and it's cold at high altitude with thin air, right? And then also up in the mountains, the rural buildings, they have 500-gallon propane tanks. That's $4 a gallon. And then they have to shovel a mile-long driveway at 9,000 feet and have a truck come every 4 weeks to deliver propane, right? But they do have power. And so that's kind of like the ideal customer, I think.
Well, there's I think in California, there's another thing that tips the scale in your favor to using the energy for Bitcoin mining. A lot of they call it net metering when you sell back to the grid. The net metering is not good in California. They do not like to pay you an appropriate rate for your energy.
Yeah. Do you know the specifics? Because I know it's unique and it's been a nightmare to try and figure out all the different ones, but I know it rarely works out in the favor of the customer.
Yeah, if you're gonna go solar in California, what I've learned is your best use case is to have a use for that energy. Do not oversize thinking, oh, I'm gonna sell back to the grid to generate profit or revenue, or do a net metering system where you're selling back to the grid. Unless you're in the desert, the land is cheap, you're going for scale. If you're like a homeowner or a building owner, it makes sense to offset your actual energy usage, and then you could use the Bitcoin miner as a load balancer, because at certain points in the year you're going to need more energy, and then you don't want to be selling excess energy at the other points of the year back to the grid for pennies on the dollar. Right. You want to use every single drop of energy you can, and I think that's when Bitcoin mining makes a ton of sense as a load balancer. But
we've seen the same here in my utility, Excel in Colorado, where it's 15 cents a kilowatt hour to buy, which is not that bad. But the net metering credit, there's two ways they'll go about it. One of them is they'll just give you 5 cents a kilowatt hour, so a third. The other one for our office here, because it's mixed use commercial, they actually credit you the full 15 cents back, but it goes into your account as a credit for the next month. And if you don't use them all by the end of the year, then it gets paid out at 1 cent. And so you clearly can't use them all, right? And I'd rather
It's
just
kinda like California. Yeah.
I'd rather just be getting paid 10 cents a kilowatt hour from the Bitcoin miners the whole time.
I actually even see like a side business that somebody could start where like you're like, hey, do you have any excess like kilowatts on your bill that that you want to get rid of before the 12-month deadline kind of thing?
And that's
And
something we're looking at, which is not even something that's invasive to your mechanical room or plumbing or infrastructure. A box that sits outside that talks to your inverter, that's it.
yeah, and like you could literally like move them, like you could just show up like for 1 month out of the year, zap the energy at that house, and then say, okay, on to the next house. Like I'm gonna go help the next customer zap their electricity. Um, and that's kind of something I had a few questions for you. I think we still got time if everyone's
Sure.
good on time. You mentioned the bathhouse. I had somebody recently tell me about them and mentioned that I should try to connect with them to maybe have them on a guest on the real estate standard, because that's like an amazing kind of, I don't know if he owns the building or if he's like a tenant there, but like that's like an ideal tenant of ours, right? Like someone that is on like you could build to suit that kind of tenant and add the miners like that. That's when it makes complete sense.
Mm-hmm.
So for like for commercial property owners, I think like, and this kind of ties into where I'm going. My next question is, in the solar industry, we saw a lot of companies come out and offer to own the solar array and lease the rooftop space. We like did the homework and we were like, okay, yeah, it makes sense for us to own this. But I think to get a lot of people that are fence sitters that are like, hey, I like this idea of mining, but I'm not totally sure of it. Have you guys thought about, or is there any company out there that will like basically come do some kind of revenue sharing or pay some kind of rent directly to the property owner, and the company takes care of the Bitcoin mining, and they find a way to utilize the heat and kind of abstract that from the property owner? I know that's kind of, it must be a tough thing to think through.
I think that that's certainly possible, and it might be the model that wins. Specifically, if you don't have to be burdened with educating the property owner about Bitcoin, right? Where we in our current position haven't tackled that for a specific reason, which is we don't want to be a money transmitter right now. So if they want dollars, then we don't want to deal with that, right? And so there, it might be something we explore in the future. I'm not sure. I would point back to those technical problems and say that I would really want to dial in some of those current hiccups with the retrofitting, and like this is in the weeds with the control and the hardware itself, so that these are really polished products. Because what we're talking about here is like, I would love to have a distribution network. I don't want to have to drive to every house. I don't want to have to drive to every building. I would love to partner with existing solar companies or et cetera, right? To do that B2B model. But you're pointing out an excellent point, which is that the Bitcoin is programmable money, right? One thing we did cool at our building here that I think you'll get a kick out of, Kenny, is we installed the heating system. Exergy did. So when we're using the miners to heat the building, those sats flow to us at Exergy. This is our demo site. Our building owner, a friend of mine, he installed the solar array. When we're monetizing excess solar, those sats go to his wallet. This is all programmatic. I'm not doing anything.
Really cool.
In real
You're
time,
right,
the
I
building,
do it.
you could pay off a loan, you could pay whatever, right? And so it is programmable energy, programmable money. And I think that introduces some really cool knobs to turn for commercial real estate deals.
That gets me excited thinking like that, where the tenant
Yep.
can benefit from the the heat, like it because then it becomes a leasehold improvement. Where I think like a lot of mining kind of projects have been like, hey, you should incorporate this into your building and you should use it and figure a way to heat your common area maintenance. But when the tenant is like, hey, we want to use heat and we're open to using like we would prefer to use Bitcoin as the heat source, are you like, would you be willing to work with us to do the leasehold improvements for that? Then that gets really interesting, right? Because like it's an amenity, like Chris kind of pointed out, to attract a tenant, and it becomes like the landlord becomes incentivized to install this heating system because it's like when you have a restaurant and like we have other real estate, not just self-storage, where we have regular retail shopping centers with tenants and a lot of restaurants, right? And they have Ansel systems. And sometimes, every once in a while, you get a new tenant. They're going to be signing a long lease, and they have a list of leasehold improvements that they're asking for. Or I could see this being something on the list, like Bathhouse wants to lease a space in your building. They have all these, saunas and hot tubs, and they'll, you know, own a portion of the miners or something. You work out some kind of deal. I think that's a good starting point. That's like a good way to get your foot in the door.
Most
There's
certainly.
a lot of creativity you could do there, right? And I think you hit it on the head, Kenny. You're realigning or better aligning the incentives between landlord and tenant, and it ultimately becomes a branding mechanism for that operator to tell to the market, hey, this is what we do at the property. Here's how it benefits both parties. They're going to have their pick at the tenant at the end of the day. So you think about longer term value, they're going to be able to select the highest quality tenants and businesses in the marketplace, which is ultimately going to produce a premium in the overall asset value, because they have stronger tenants, stronger businesses there. So it's a multi, there's 2, 3, 4 layers of positive implications here. Sorry, Tyler, I cut you off there.
Fully agree. And something that came to me through that explanation was, this is something my friend Nicholas is working on with his product called the Constellation Heater, which is intended for pool and spa heating. So more residential, but also larger commercial as well. I would call that a luxury heat source, right? If it's a tenant improvement opportunity. He's targeting, and there's also a company in Europe called 21 Energy doing this, to actually partner up with the utility. Imagine buildings being able to participate in demand response, right? If the grid is stressed, this 50,000 gallon pool does not actually need to be heated for an hour. It won't even lose that much temperature. It's 50,000 gallons. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so this is a way for smaller commercial applications, not giant mega scale, to participate in this like constellation. I think Nicholas's company is well named, this constellation of demand response as well. And that could be another revenue stream.
Yeah. I want to push on two topics, or kind of two things here, because I don't want this to be all, roses and daisies. But
yeah,
the two challenges that I see just from, the private ownership level, the family offices, the smaller private investors and operators. One is how you alluded to it earlier, Tyler. How does it integrate, if at all, to the existing BMS, building management system? Mm-hmm. And then second, where does all of this fit in, if at all, to planning and permitting and making sure your building is compliant with the jurisdiction you're operating in? Is it still the Wild West? I imagine to some extent, yes. But sorry, mm-hmm. I don't want to answer my own question. But
I'm glad you brought these up.
Those are the two biggest, as someone in my chair who's on the front lines talking to the operator, right, the end user. Those are the first two questions that are going to come up as far as, do I even take this to the next level of the conversation?
Short answer, these are both unsolved problems. The playbook we released a couple weeks ago with TFTC focuses on that residential space because of that open source smart home control software that we were able to build plugins for miners to talk to. Boom, now miners can talk to thermostats, they can talk to solar, done. I'm very fortunate for Bart and this project in Boulder County that I want to shout out in Lyons, where he's effectively willing to be the guinea pig developer, right? An investor in this. And that's really critical because we have not yet fully built the control integration to the common building management systems, BACnet. That is a technical problem that still needs to be solved. We're waiting to work with their controls engineer, because that's a great point, Chris. At this scale, it's not just, hey, homeowner, I'm going to put this little Raspberry Pi that runs this software, whatever, we'll run it on your Start 9, we're done. They already have a planned control module control system with sensors and wires and things talking to it, and we need to be compatible. We're not coming in with our own thing there. And that's how you talk to the rest of your mechanical infrastructure. And so the beauty is that BACnet is already open source. So I do view that as something that will be solvable. The other end of that technical problem is the miner firmware. That's effectively the software running on the miner. These things are not tuned, designed to turn off and on really quick. You know, some of them like 40-minute ramp-up cycles. Well, I don't want the heat in 40 minutes. I want it now. What if a cloud comes in 30 minutes, right? Or being able to throttle that like the accelerator pedal on your car. I want 50% throttle, not 100%. These are things that the technical problem teams are working on. And the 256 Foundation's an open source focused 501c3 nonprofit that I also help lead on the board, building those technical solutions. The button on that is, think Linux for computing, but for Bitcoin mining. So you could do whatever you want. We're not locked into what the data center guys want. We could design these things to be controllable and work great with BACnet and building management systems from the start. The other thing you pointed out is the non-technical challenges, the people challenges, the regulatory, the certification space. No Bitcoin miners to date are UL certified. In Europe, it's called CE. Usually they're done in tandem. In the US, we have a different, I think it's like a private entity. It's just kind of like the mob, effectively. Pay your money to them, go through the process, you'll get the stamp, then you'll pass permitting, you're allowed to have this in the building. These Bitcoin miners are designed, if you think about it, for lowest cost, cheapest CapEx. And if you're building 20 megawatts in a warehouse in off-grid Wyoming, they don't care about that. They don't want to pay more per machine so that they have the stamp. They're taking that risk. It's a non-negotiable in the building space. And so this is where I think there's two ways to go about it: to be the guinea pig and to design. That's the beauty of the hybrid buddy system, where you already design the gas heating system. You already have the utility connect for the solar. So the system works flawlessly as intended without the Bitcoin miners. Just got to jump through some hoops to get the Bitcoin miners, in there after the fact, permitted as, a computing rack, not heating. Like it's all linguistics here, right? Mm-hmm. And that's something we're actively navigating with the MEP team and this Boulder project. The good news is, happy to share, we're championing this victory for Bart and his team. They got that loan underwritten as designed with the Bitcoin miner in the mechanical room on the engineering drawings. So that's fantastic. Next, we got to move into the control. The others,
he really had to work his tail off to make all that work. I was chatting with him a couple of weeks ago, and he was giving me the latest and greatest, and holy camoly. Talk about hoops.
And I feel for him too, because as we've been connected to the MEP team there, working with them on a consulting basis, they're asking us questions, and I'm effectively the middleman to these Chinese manufacturers. And let's just say the spec sheets aren't answering questions that traditional mechanical engineers for buildings are asking, right? Mm-hmm. And so it is the Wild West, to your point, Chris. The other solution is to just have a willing partner, a manufacturer, that is open to creating a case study. I think a playbook, very, very similar to what we did in the residential space, is required for the commercial space to highlight how that's done and solved. This is where I think of a Block, Jack Dorsey's company that's building Bitcoin miners in the US. I think that's a much easier barrier to cross, to go to them and say, we want to do this pilot project. We want to get UL certification. Maybe it is already UL certified. I'm not sure. But I think that it's just a much easier path than what's been a little bit underwhelming over the past couple of years, is trying to convince this TAM, this target market, to the ASIC manufacturers that are currently leading the charge, when they already sell their 100,000 units to the mega miners. That it's not worth it for them.
I phrased it the way that question the way I did, because as far as getting adoption, ramping up the adoption on everything we're covering here today, and integrating the mining into the systems, it's going to have to come from that private sector of the market that is, one, they understand it, they see the value, they're willing to ask for forgiveness, not for permission necessarily.
Correct.
So, you think about some of the larger operators, right? The household name, the Prologises, the Brookfields, the Blackstones, right? I mean, those institutions have to be buttoned up at all times, right? So when you tell some ops man or fund manager that, it's not going to talk to the existing BMS, there's no straight path through the municipality for planning and permit approvals, it's dead on arrival. So, we're definitely charting some new territory here. That's not anything we're unfamiliar with on the pod, but it's definitely going to come from the Barts of the world. It's going to come from the Westmains of the world. One note on Bart's project, we got to get Bart on the pod here too, Kenny. They had underwritten that the mining proceeds were going to pay for this was a brand new ground up construction project. They underwrote very conservatively that the satoshis from the mining were going to pay off the construction, the cost to build the facility in 15 years. Do you know what CAGR he used for that calculation?
I don't off the top of my head.
He used 20. He used 20.
Wow.
I met him at the first time when we were having this conversation at the Heat Punk Summit earlier this year, and he when he was telling me this, I looked at him. I couldn't believe he used 20% over the next 15 years. I said, "So you're super bearish, man. Like,
Yeah,
what's going on?" But anyway, just so if you're not an expert at energy or mining, you're just a pure real estate capitalist and trying to squeeze every last penny out of your project, look at it through that lens. There's a very good chance that the Sats can pay for the project.
Just think about over that long of a time frame, 15, 20, 25 years, whatever it is for a construction loan, how much solar energy and heat will flow through that building, right? And if you're able to get a marginally more expensive heating system that can pay off the construction loan, why would you not?
Kenny, this goes to some of the other some of the bigger topics that we've touched on, and that is re-incentivizing the market to hold real estate long term. Right, it's a long duration asset. Historically, we've seen the market move away from that over the last 10 years, just because the dynamics in the marketplace don't make it all that profitable to hold long term. Right, you're getting crushed during your holding period with all these rising costs. So most real estate investors, they make their money on the exit. So that's why you see these hold times, Tyler, compress from 10 plus years to 3 to 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're getting in, they acquire the asset, they have their value add strategy that they're going to apply to the asset. They do it as fast and as cheap as possible. It's often terrible quality. And then they flip out of the asset 36, 60 months later, and they make their money on that exit. So if you can, just from this Bitcoin mining lens, not any of the other pillars that we chat about on this pod, but from Bitcoin mining specifically, thinking through the amount of energy that flows through that asset, I'm incentivized now to hold that building for 20 years.
Right.
And just keep it in really good operational condition, make sure I have high quality tenants, really steward the asset and have that pride of ownership all over again. It reinstills some of those longer term values, if you will.
That's a great way to think about it.
That I think we're missing.
If you got a large volume, talk about a giant square footage roof for solar, it's like, why would you get rid of that asset when you know that amount of energy is going to be flowing through it, converting to sats in perpetuity?
I've been super critical about the vintage of the age of the building, right? And the overall obsolescence in CRE. And I've said numerous times, like, if you own a building that was built before 1990, just sell it, like, get rid of it, right? Like, the liquidity is a lot more valuable to you than, adding a 15th layer of paint to your 1980 building.
Mm-hmm.
Kenny has helped me kind of rethink that opinion to some extent, where using the real estate as this base layer, like, generator, right? This generator to help the Bitcoin flywheel start to turn, where I'm like, okay, maybe maybe that 1980 building, is worth something, right? Where you can integrate some of these strategies, the mining, the Bitcoin treasury, all of that, where I don't know, it just flips the equation. There's a lot of different ways to look at it, but it's incredibly exciting.
Very.
Fun story. Westmain Self Storage was originally first it was before it was a tradesman center. Before the tradesman center, it was a furniture storage warehouse.
Oh wow.
And this was like a piece of crap, warehouse, falling apart, leaks inside. We had repurposed it to a tradesman center, and I think I've told this story. I won't tell the full story, but it was one of these 1970s, 1980s warehouses that was just, like it wasn't the best use case. So we identified the best use case, and we're forever hold guys. Just that's like what attracted us to Bitcoin. We don't intend on selling our Bitcoin unless there's, a real estate deal that we want to maybe pursue or something like that. But the idea is like we don't have to find another investment ever. We have Bitcoin. That's why we like it so much. And yeah, I think when you look, like what Chris was saying, when you look at real estate as the foundation, and even if you're a Bitcoiner, you can utilize that real estate to acquire Bitcoin in multiple different ways. Like haven't been mining, and maybe we have to kind of revisit that. There's a few other things I wanted to touch on the mining component, but when you add these ancillary revenue streams together, like it's like doing its own form of compounding. You're compounding that real estate, and I think the more, like, because you're pointing out that once you have solar, the mining becomes even more of a no-brainer. So like when you start compounding all these revenue streams into one, you're able to find these hidden byproducts, if you will, like
Exactly.
these alternative use cases, and they start working very well together. And one thing I thought of while on this call, it's popped into my head before, but it popped in again, was geothermal heat. I haven't really heard many people talk about using the miners to generate geothermal heat. And the reason I think that could be interesting is that's a nice to have. That's not like something where you need geothermal heat a lot of the time and it doesn't pencil out, or like the project's done, like you're scrapping the project. That's like a nice to have thing. So it's like I could see that being like a luxurious thing where it's like, oh, we have extra energy, unused energy from the solar. Let's fire up the miner and let's like go barefoot and walk on the warm concrete, right?
That's how I view it. I mean, these are energy tools, and buildings use energy, and there's a lot of interesting ways that you can integrate them to reduce operating expenses and increase revenue. So that's my view for the future. And just to tie it up, like that's why I think this is where the majority of hash rate will end up, over the guys constantly fighting for cheaper power on grid or off grid. In the sense that these buildings, like I said, it's a sunk cost. You already have the solar, you already get that benefit. I almost view this as the tool in the toolkit that completes a solar system, right? The tool in the toolkit that makes your heating system ready for the 21st century, right? And so with that understanding of hash rate being a tool to make heat and money and monetize excess energy, I'm excited to see where we end up in a couple of years' time.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back on as you're, progressing with the project that you have in Colorado, and I'm gonna have to find you on X. And if you want to give a shout out where we can find you, have to start following what you're working on.
Sure. Yeah, you can find me pretty much anywhere at my name, Tyler K. Stevens. We are at Exergy _ on X. And Chris briefly mentioned it, the Heat Punk Summit. That's become the hacker pleb movement community name of all the guys doing the tinkering and the hard work to integrate Bitcoin miners into building integrated systems. And we host an annual summit in February, end of February, where we bring 100 or so folks from the Bitcoin mining space, and then 60 to 70 from the building space, be it home insurers, inspectors, electricians, plumbers, developers, etc. So if you're listening to this and you're interested in that, go to heatpunks.org. We want more people from that building side of the industry to come share their expertise so that we can kind of back solve these problems and really get a proof of concept off the ground, specifically in the commercial space. I think that will go a long way.
We'll include a link
out.
to Heat Punks there too, Tyler.
Great.
And thanks for what you're doing with the 256 Foundation as well. We'll include some links there. And I got to get the link from you for the playbook, because I think that you guys did an exceptional job on that. And that's a great place for people to start, understand, that not only just the broader framework, but what are the real life applications and proper first steps, right, to getting started. The playbook has a section for exactly that. What if I want to explore applying this to my building, where the heck do I start, without spending a bunch of money and making a bunch of mistakes? Obviously, you and your team at Exergy can shepherd everybody through that process, but I think the playbook is a nice place to start, so they can probably get some low-hanging questions answered and come to you guys a little bit more dangerous than they would have otherwise.
Yes, well, thank you. The playbook really is our way of just sharing with the world. This is what we've learned over our 4 or 5 different installs, and our playbook for how we think through building integrated mining, everything from the future, but also to, maybe you already have a miner if you're listening and you're a passionate Bitcoiner, or you might want to take the leap of faith and actually dive into this now and go through some of the retrofitting and the harder challenges to make it happen, but to be ahead of the curve. And so the playbook outlines all of that for you there.
Cool.
Awesome. Tyler, thanks for joining us today. That's it for today's episode. If this conversation was useful, please share it with someone, a partner, a client, someone making decisions in these marketplaces. New episodes drop weekly. So until next time, for Tyler Stevens, Chris Drizga, and Kenny Alves, I'm Tim Kotzman. Stay disciplined, think long-term, and stack sats. This is the Real Estate Standard. If you enjoyed today's conversation and you own commercial real estate, we'd encourage you to think about how these broader shifts might impact your own property over the next decade. Many owners are starting to reconsider how they structure their balance sheets, manage capital, and position their assets for the future. If you'd like to explore how some of these ideas might apply to your own situation, you're welcome to reach out. We work with property owners and investors to think through strategy, structure, and long-term positioning in a rapidly changing market.